I would now like to warmly welcome all of the panelists in this session to come up to the stage and make a very special introduction to Rihanna Robinson. Rihanna is an assistant professor in First Nations Studies. She's also the senior advisor in Aboriginal Relations to the president here at the university. And I'm going to welcome Rihanna to make some opening remarks and do introductions. And we've got a little bit of a revised speaker schedule for today. Really, unfortunately, Karen Sharp has come down with a bug at the last minute. But this is one of the fantastic opportunities of an event like this, that there are so many people in the audience that are qualified speakers, engaging speakers to speak to these issues, that we've got some really wonderful people that will fill the space that Karen's left. So welcome, Rihanna.
Good morning, everyone. The sun's shining out there, which is quite nice, and the snow is melting, but I know we're going to get more. So it's my pleasure to be here this morning and be the moderator for the session entitled Indigenous Land Use Planning and Cumulative Impacts Management. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the speakers. We have Agnes Peloska-Mainville and Clayton Davis. Agnes is from UNBC. Clayton Davis is presenting on behalf of the Treaty 8 Cumulative Effects Framework Working Group, and Sandra Harris with the Gitxsan Governance Council. And finally, well, no, that's it for now. So if I can welcome those panelists up to begin our session this morning. Everybody comfy? So the first question to start this session off, and I'm going to start with the panelists to answer, maybe we'll start with Sandra first, is how do you think Indigenous leadership is contributing to or shifting the conversation on cumulative effects, climate change, and the future of integrative land use planning?
Good morning. For me, watershed planning is an opportunity to bring the teachings, the voice, the philosophy, and the values of our Indigenous people. We come from a place of all my relations of being one with the land and water. Our spirit is connected to the land, and that philosophy is what grounds our world. And in our daily lives, we see the disconnection between what we believe and then what we see. It's not necessarily the same. And so if we're able to look at planning and look at our work and reframe it in a way that captures all those elements of healthy land and healthy people, if we can look at it that way, it's more holistic, it's more meaningful, and it's grounded in our teachings of being one and being whole. And so that to me is the most exciting part of that kind of work. It's the only time I've ever seen that happen in our world is when we take it from a watershed perspective of being one and being whole. I've not seen that anywhere else. So that to me is so exciting. I've done lots of watershed planning work. I've seen the disconnections going from one ministry to the next ministry, and our elders and our chiefs are tired of that. They want to see, they want to know that people are listening and that they can do that. And so this kind of work allows us to share that. And so that's very, very important. It's very fundamental that we start there. And then we can see how all these pieces fit in, how we can work together. And so, to me, that's the most important part. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
The leaders have to remember, we did not inherit this land from our ancestors. We borrowed from our children. We have to make sure it's still there for them at the end of the day. None of us are going to move to Mars. We have to take care of our land. We have to take care of everything on the land. It's a holistic approach. We've used that for thousands of years, since time immemorial. Using that approach when you're looking at land use planning, what's going to happen? What's going down? We're able to better look at everything that's going on and say, okay, this is what we want for the future. Not just, hey, let's go and make a fast buck and walk away. We're tired of that. We have to change the status quo of what's happening. And they've been doing that through consultation with the government, working on all these wonderful programs that have been initiated.
Thank you. One of the ways that I see this question of how Indigenous leaders are integrating the idea of planning and cumulative impacts in their community work is, first of all, after years of colonialism and erasure of Aboriginal peoples from the landscape and the presence of Indigenous peoples from the landscape, one of the ways that I see planning being returned is by having First Nations put a First Nations face back onto the landscape and into Indigenous planning or to landscape planning in general. In my work with a number of communities in northern Manitoba, specifically one First Nation that had a planning project at Kiosk Dam. It was called Imposed on Them, Top Down. Basically asserted the fact that these individuals had no say in what was being imposed on their traditional territory. And in another case study with Poplar River First Nation, another community, it was a different sort of planning. It was a planning initiative to protect a pristine territory that that communities basically maintained over generations, and to protect it through a park, which again was imposed top down and did not support local livelihoods. So in my experience, what these communities did is put their voice back on the landscape, put their faces back on the landscape, and look at cumulative impacts at the very local level, meaning, are we sustaining our livelihoods? Are we maintaining our subsistence economies? Are we creating healthy communities in terms of our peoples, in terms of our lands, our environments? And part of the reason that I think this session and this discussion is important is, how do we support communities doing that? Even if sometimes they challenge our own views and perspective of what it means to exploit the resources or have planning or protect the environment, but also how do we, in my role as a professor, how do we teach students and young people about how to do that, how to ensure capacity is given to communities, how to support communities in developing capacity, and how do we provide young people the tools and skills they need in order to work with communities, navigate some of the challenges with resource exploitation, resource development, and of course, economic development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to the second question, but we really want to encourage the audience participation as well, and you bringing forward any questions to the panel members. But I'll move up forward to this question, and then hopefully we can engage with the audience. So the next question is, are there key challenges that you, your community, or your organization are facing in undertaking and implementing land use planning? Can you speak to any success you have had in overcoming those challenges?
My head's kind of in a fog. Can you say that again, Rihanna? Some successes in land use planning. For one thing, we always say planning for land use. Our language is really important in the work that we do. The first thing that we've in the many, many years that we've been doing this work, we always go to our knowledge holders and our speakers, and we ask them about the importance of relation to land, relationship to water, and we get to learn what that fundamental relationship is as a people. And so from that, we build up from that, and we share, we teach with one another. Some of the most phenomenal meetings I've ever been to are with elders and speakers talking about a concept. There's a legal term here and we need to translate it into Wet'suwet'en or Gitxsan. What does consultation mean to our people? It's often not a very good thing. It's a very negative thing. People show up, then they're gone, and all of a sudden a decision is made. And that's probably our biggest challenge. So if we take the time to listen to our people, their stories, our rich heritage, and the language, and the relationships that are around the room, not just with our elders and our families, but with our neighbors, our Indigenous groups that are around us, who's all in our watershed. What happens up here impacts to us down the river. What we do impacts those further down the river. And our people used to make decisions up and down the line. And that was just everyday living. And we were very respectful of those relations because we needed to be in balance. That was harmony. I don't like that word, but that's what our people called it. That was the balance. But now these decisions are coming, and our people may or may not have a decision or a role in that. So we have to back up and say what's happening and ask those questions and listen to our elders and our leaders and our children. Our children have a voice too, and our youth. And so if we're able to bring those families together with our elders, we find out what those Indigenous teachings are. And they're mostly about connection and relationships. And then we have a place to start from. This is something we want protected. This is a sacred area. This is very important to us. This is an area that's been impacted by mining, 80 years ago, and it's still not usable for our people. It's damaged the water. Our people call it dirty. It's dirty now. We can't use it. The moose are sick in that area. So we can't use that. We can't go there. Our medicines are not available there. We can't get berries there. There's all these things that we're aware of, and we have to make decisions about. And so that's for today, that's for tomorrow. The sustainability piece is so important. We have to know that the Talco watershed, where my territory is going to be in good shape for my children. I have 4 children. And we go up there every summer for berries, we get medicines. We spend time out there all the time. That's our well-being. That's where our mental health and strengths come from. My ancestors come from that place. And so that's a connection for me. That's a responsibility I have as an Indigenous person to know what's happening in that area and that there's good decisions being made there. And if not, then I go around and I ask a lot of questions. What's happening? And sometimes the government doesn't like that. We've had to do roadblocks. We've had to do land action to protect something that's important to us. And that's not easy to do because who pays for that? Our kids. Our kids pay for those times when we stand up and say no. It's on the school ground that the kids get bullied and the racism comes out. Those are very, very difficult times for our people. But we need that opportunity to have dialogue and to have a safe place to talk to one another. And so I've been involved in many opportunities to do that, and there's been some really good things coming out of that. But unless it's safe and unless there's a respectful relationship approach, then it probably won't work. And so I've had the opportunity and the blessing to be part of many of those discussions. And we've had many good things come from that. So that collaboration, being respectful, listening, coming out on the land with our people, those are all really important things. Masai.
We have to go from making resource-based decisions to value-based decisions. What are the values we want out there protected as a collective whole when you're looking at a piece of land, tributary, anything like that? This is what we want protected. The Old Man Lily project done at the Halfway River is an excellent example, and it worked. We had government and everybody involved on that. The elders were involved. Bob Baradell was instrumental in doing this. It worked out. Everybody signed off on it. Those values were protected. Resource extraction is going to go, but those things were protected. It was a challenge, but everybody got together and said, okay, let's do this. And it worked out great. Things are changing. The culture is changing out there, how we're working with the First Nations and all the other governments and everybody else and coming to collective thinking, hey, we're going to take care of this land. We're going to be here down the road. So it does work. It just takes time and just keep plugging away at it, folks.
Thank you. I actually echo the voices of the previous panelists. I think one of the successes of having different planning initiatives, whether good or bad, is the fact that communities are now kind of, in some ways, working together and feeling a sense of ownership and self-determination over what is it that they can do and react to a specific planning initiatives that, for example, do not align with their points of views. And as well as, I think that the nature of the negotiations has changed. And one of the overarching, perhaps, successes is the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and the calls for actions, which I think changed the way that planning is approached, that cumulative impacts are taken into account, and also the Tsokatin decision and the idea of the changing face of consultations. I think that's definitely some of the things that have arisen outside of the planning, Indigenous planning discipline. And in terms of having successes and failures, the two communities I mentioned, one of them, the failure but yet success, there's always double sides to everything, is Fox Lake Cree Nation was the one community that had the dam imposed on them. So there was, I was part of that group. We took the Manitoba Hydro, in this case, to the Clean Environment Commission hearings as interveners and basically presented voices that were often ignored in the environmental impacts and the written statements of the proponents. And in that sense, I think changed how the proponents are dealing with First Nations and elders from that point forward, because they realize that these elders have this powerful voice, and basically this platform enabled those voices to come forward and be vocal of the whole process, the whole system, the written formats that they assumed the elders weren't reading, because there's like 20 volumes that are this wide. But that wasn't the case. They did hear everything, and they just wanted to respond to those planning projects. And in the second case of Poplar River First Nation, the First Nation actually reacted by designing a land use plan, which wasn't something that they created anew. It was actually something that they wrote up based out of traditional governance. So basically the things they've been doing for thousands of years, they put it into writing, and then reacted to all those different projects that were being planned on their territory without the consultation, and nominated their traditional territory as a World Heritage Site, which hopefully will be decided this summer. So these two examples indicate successes of First Nations, whether preemptively or in reaction to different projects that were being planned. And another one that I can think of is the Site C project, which I know is very big in the news, and my own personal feelings about it are that I think it's a disappointing decision, if I can get political here. And part of the reason is, and I've argued before the BCUC, that it's a irresponsible project for numerous reasons. And one of the irresponsibilities of that project, aside from economics and land destruction, is the cumulative impacts that it's going to have at the very local level for communities. So the destruction of food systems, the destruction of cultural heritage, of spaces, of important cultural sites. Even though some people may say that, yes, the creation of jobs for local communities is also a success, and I think definitely navigating some of those tensions and some of those difficulties for communities that have participated as in the project, as working with the proponents and obtaining the impacts benefits agreements are to some way a little success that they can gain, often with heavy hearts. But it basically indicates how challenging the discussion is on Indigenous planning and establishing what is success and what is a failure in terms of cumulative impacts and the idea of navigating resources development, resources and resource management on Indigenous lands. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And tying in really well with this question that was just asked of the panelists, thank you so much for your remarks. I'd like to invite Clayton up to give a brief presentation on some of the cumulative effects framework for treaty rights and how that is being considered within his own work and what he's doing with his communities.
Good morning. I'm a member of the Saulteaux First Nations, the Cree Nation in Northeast BC, located just north of by the Chetwynd, Moby Lake area, signatory to Treaty 8 in 1899. Treaty rights and cumulative effects assessment. The treaty was signed. One of the concern of the First Nations was how is it going to affect our way of life, our ability to hunt, fish, trap, and gather. We didn't want to sign it because we thought we would lose our way of life. The federal government said, okay, it'll be as if you never entered a treaty. You continue your way of life. There's no forced interference, which is a major component of the treaty and our ability to exercise our treaty rights. Treaty rights are more complex than just hunting, fishing, trapping, gathering. Western science has to look at they look at the biophysical indicator. Oh, there's how many moose out there? Well, how healthy are the moose? Where are they located? Where's the access to the moose? Those are things that come into play when you're looking at just that. The treaty has to be interpreted as the way we interpret it, as the way our signers looked at it when we signed the treaty. When we had a court battle the other day, we had 5 generations of people who I talked to my great grandma and them. My great grandpa was 121 when he died, so he told me many, many things about what happened when those treaties are signed and stuff. How they remember it. We talk about interpretation of languages and that. It's fundamental. When you don't know the word mining and they talk about mining in a treaty, nobody knew what mining was. Those are concepts that have to be looked at when you look at treaty rights. Maintain our mode of life. There's many things that we have to look at when we're looking at these wonderful cumulative effects that everybody talks about. How does it affect us? What else comes along? The Murray River watershed has lots of mines and stuff up there. Forestry, agriculture, everything's happening up in northeast BC and Tumble Ridge area. It's just astounding the amount of activities happening. I see review every project north of Prince George to the Yukon border, from Alberta across. Every project I looked at, that's what I did for a number of years. Every project. Anybody who's doing anything on their private land, I had to look at those referrals. Every major project I had to look at. So there's an astounding amount of stuff that's happening out there. Cumulative effects assessments done by the BC Environmental Assessment Office are limited. The value components, they determine what the value components are. It doesn't do me any good if not looking at what we're worried about. They talk about, oh, today, here's the impact. Tomorrow, what's going to happen? Well, what about before the Europeans stepped here and made those anthropogenic changes? That's how we remember. That's what we talk about. So we talked about the water quality in the Murray River. You got 5 mines depositing things into the water, saying, oh, it's okay here, okay here, okay here, and it adds up down the road. The fish can't reproduce. Can't drink the water. You can't swim in the water. That is nasty. When it was fresh water we drank everywhere. It's pretty sad when you can't go out and drink the water that we used to swim in years ago. So the Independent First Nations group said, let's work with industry and government and get something going. Doig, McLeod Lake, Soto, and Westmore got together and started developing this group. We have some other nations who have participated in it. Some of them have joined, some of them haven't. We all have the same problem, but things are busy, people are busy. It's hard to get everything going. Like, I'm surprised everybody showed up here like this. We're all swamped doing what we do, right? But thank you all for being here. It's great stuff. Good to see the collective group. So we decided to develop a framework based on our treaty rights and what the community wants, the value components of the community. Just saying, oh, we want this, we want that, without knowing what the community wants is just a waste of time and energy. So we meet with the community, we talk to them. What are you looking for? What do you want us to take care of out there? What are your concerns? What are you worried about? And this is what we've done with the Murray River. We collaborate with all these other wonderful groups that are doing all these cool things. The framework outline you designed is based on the treaty rights, the poles of the treaty rights. There's value components on these poles. I'll show you later down here, out here, some of these poles and these indicators and everything ties together based on the treaty. Soto and Doig have done some work, and Cloud Lake's done some work. It's being worked on. It's work in progress. It's gone farther than this presentation. This presentation is a little old, so don't worry about it. But here's the essential poles of the treaty. You have pillars of the community. What do you want? Like, what are the basis that you're looking for? And then we got to break these all those wonderful things down. Making a living, First Nations economy, sharing economy. That's one of the poles. The way of living, Pimwatsiwin, that's how we pronounce it in the Cree. These are all parts that make us who we are. These are just the main pillars. This is something we're all looking into. Medicine, sustainable land use, cultural songs and stories, it helps identify who we are. These are things that we need protected when we talk about cumulative effects and impacts. What's happening with it is affecting us. We want these things taken care of. So Pimwatsiwin, the way of living. We've got trapping, gathering, hunting, spiritual, seasonal round, traditional knowledge, fishing, language, place names, customs, transportation access. All this ties in to our way of living. That defines who we are. You have hunters, you have medicine men, you have gatherers. That defines us as a people, as an individual in our community. This is essential. When you're taking away our ability to do that, to identify ourselves, you've destroyed those people. Hunting. They say, oh, there's no impact on hunting when I get a referral from the government. All this comes into play when you're looking at hunting. Everything there ties into the hunting. What do we need to hunt? We need specific sites. We need caches where we hide our food. We have camps. We need water. We need to transfer the knowledge to the youth. Plant. How many people know when certain plants bloom, they know that's when the time to go get the moose is. That pops up. That's critical. Without those plants flowering, we don't know when the moose are the fattest and time to go get them. Well, we do, but that happens. These are things that tie into it. Where the animals are, where they're going. They talk about the high elevation winter ranges, the summer ranges. What about between that? What, you only eat once a day? These animals need this. They need the protection, need the riparian zones so they can calve and have their calves protected and hidden from the predators. You have all these seismic lines. You've created islands out there where the raptors sit up there and take out the fishes and the marlins. You've destroyed animals. They can't reproduce. And they always say, hey, we know this. We talk about it. Every day we tell these folks. So all this comes into play. And this is something that's essential when you're looking at cumulative effects. What else is in there? It's a large program. Healthy camp areas, what do you need? You need clean water. You need trusted water. Just because it's clean doesn't mean it's getting good. If there's a perception that water has been poisoned, or if anything flowing into it, no one's going to use it again. You need good forest, because you got to sneak up on the moose. They need a good place to eat, to hide from the rain, to cover in the snow. Fresh air. You got vehicles driving up and down the road, got dust that destroys our berries and destroys the foliage, and the animals won't eat off it. Forestry spraying everything. Peaceful enjoyment. The elders say, hey, when I can sit there and listen to the wind and that's all I hear, how great is that? I went on and got an elk last summer. I could hear the traffic flying up and down the road across the valley. That is not peaceful enjoyment, even though I was able to exercise my tree day to get that elk. Where we used to hunt, where we can now is changing. We have to go farther and farther to exercise our rights to get these foods. The cabin, our Long Lake cabin, our trapline cabin. I woke up in the morning, got out there at 5 o'clock in the morning and shot deer in my underwear. Boom, it's right there. Because Grandma said, go get it. But now we have to go farther and farther to get these animals. It adds up. Work on the community members. What do we need? What do you want? Thank you.
So I just want to invite some questions from the audience that people may have for panelists. Thank you for the presentation, Clayton. It's so important that we're acknowledging of all of the impacts this is having on the region that we're living within. So there are microphones available if anybody has a question that you'd like to ask.
Merci, Clayton. You know, Clayton, we go way back, and I think back in the early days of land use planning in the Peace. I think of the work that you were helping to lead on the Sustainable Resource Use Plan for the Peace Moberly Tract, and what we tried to do with Twin Sisters and the land and resource management plans, and now the work that you're doing with cumulative effects management. And I'm wondering, when you look at the battlefield, it's what it is. There's triage in areas we don't go, like Del Rio. And I'm thinking, with the work that you're doing now, and being able to now set the stage with a government that seems to be now committed to renewing the land use, pulling those plans back, because that took a lot of work to make those. How confident do you feel like now that you can take this analysis and be a full and equal partner in setting new directions for protection for areas that you need to set aside for traditional use as a priority?
The government has made a commitment with the Regional Strategic Environmental Assessment that came out of the ESI. We are working with them. We are working with them steadily to say, here's what we want, and here's what we're looking for. We have areas we identified that are pristine. We want to keep it that way. I can exercise my treaty rights here. I can have my peaceful enjoyment here. We have areas that have been impacted to some degree. Fine, we're going to allow this resource extraction to go. But we're going to make sure that we do planning to take care of the land. I don't believe in reclamation. Reclamation like throw dirt on the ground. Let's restore it. I want restoration back in the true sense. We have areas that are decimated. You can't do it. But there's certain parts of those areas we can restore as well. Collectively, we're working together to do this on a regional basis, based on the LNG. Now, you also have forestry, you have mining, you have agriculture, you have tourism. Those other things come into play as well, and they overlap each other. Speaking of tourism, they found those dinosaur tracks of the Johnson. They said, hey, we're going to build a big tourist area. No, we don't want that area disturbed. I'm not going to let you build a highway here and just destroy more land. We'll protect it. Let's work with it. Oh, okay. So these are things that are happening. We are working as a collective group in getting decisions done. Down the road, we can hopefully change legislature. You got a mountain. Oh, well, there's caribou up there. Well, you're not allowed to touch 80% of the caribou for the woodland, for intact habitat. You put the Brule mine in, you just took out 20% of their caribou habitat for the region. That's 80% left. Now what? Oh, they want it over here. They want it over here. Indicators, get things going, stop and say, okay, fine. This is enough here. That's enough there. Mining can go here. Forestry can't go there. Oil and gas can go here. And hydro ties everything together. And Ministry of Transportation puts roads to get everything going. All these things come into play. So when you have to look at it from a huge picture and say, what do we want? What can we do? And it's slowly coming around, but it is happening. It is being done out there. Industry is changing. Dinosaurs, they used to walk and say, hey, here's what we've done, and that was it, and walk away. Now they're coming up to say, here's where we want to go. The Oman Lily Project was a perfect example of how things have changed with that. Thank you.
And I'm just going to add to Clayton's voice that in terms of reclamation versus mitigation, all those terms that are often used in industry and in our work, we have advocated for an independent body to be created every time there's a project built, especially in my experience with hydro, because an independent body that consists of usually professors, community members, academic researchers, environmental groups, that's really at arm's length from any sort of industry is really important because they can examine the work and the studies that different industries conduct and how they conduct them with community members, because I totally agree with Clayton. I have seen, for example, remediation, basically, or reclamation being done is basically putting all equipment in a hole and covering it up with dirt. So there are actually trucks and containers and rubber tires and different machinery and other tools that are basically buried under the land, and that is considered reclamation, and that's unacceptable. And I think somebody needs to monitor that. So I think there needs to be a group that monitors industry and planning initiatives that's really at arm's length from any sort of studies conducted by specific industries or organizations. So.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Appreciate it. I'm just going to actually welcome Assembly First Nations Regional Chief Terry Teegee and invite him to provide any comments from his perspective from Carriacou County Tribal Council and also his role with the AFN.
Masi Rihanna. Deneza, Tsekuza, Skyza, Samoyget, Tsimanak, Tsimawiget. Delegates, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the territory of the Clegli Tene, whose territory we're on today. My name is Terry Teegee. I'm up here as part of the Carriacou County experiences. Karen Sharp couldn't make it today, but I also was supposed to speak this morning. I thought I was supposed to be here this afternoon. In regards to my my current position as a regional chief of British Columbia, where there are approximately 203 First Nations communities that are in I suppose, in a very different political arena and situation today, because quite frankly, we're in a time of reconciliation with the report of the TRC, but more importantly, the commitments from the British Columbia NDP government, coalition government, and also the federal Liberal government to who are supporting the United Nations declarations for the rights of Indigenous people. So to me, as part of this panel and looking at the discussions of cumulative impacts, I was just thinking about this morning. It's probably the closest we've come in the discussions of cumulative impacts that we could come to our point of view as Indigenous people, where we're having a holistic view of how development affects our people. So in the experience of the Carriacou County, you've heard from many of our delegates here, in particular one from Treaty 8 area, where the development of liquefied natural gas was, from the last administration of the provincial government, were really pushing for development of liquefied natural gas. In terms of the Carriacou County involvement, there are approximately 6 oil pipelines that we had to deal with, including one oil pipeline, which was the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline. So out of all these other 4 or 5 pipelines that were in development of liquefied natural gas, we participated in the environmental assessment process back in 2014. And during that experience, it was the Trans-Canada Coastal GasLink pipeline, and also the Prince Rupert Gas Pipeline and the West Coast pipeline, which was originally proposed by Spectra Energy. All these pipelines were being proposed, originated out of the Treaty 8 area and the development of many of the natural gas fields up there. So we went back to our communities, in particular 6 of our communities, and started talking about the issues of pipelines. And during those discussions, many of our administrations, our chief and council, our technical people went back to the communities and those that are living off the lands to learn about what this effect is going to have on their lives. So it wasn't just the linear development of the pipeline in of itself, it was the fragmentation of the land, it was the infrastructure, it was the roads, it was the historical development already developed in terms of forest harvesting, it was mining exploration, it was use of water, it was all these things within, not only within the right-of-way, but that would affect not only our people as Carrie-Sakani, but the other questions that came up, how is this going to affect the Treaty 8 area and the massive amounts of development that they will experience, the many seismic lines, the massive amount of water that are needed to extract the gas, and also the energy required. So these were the questions that were brought up by our communities. There were approximately well over 200 recommendations at the end of that environmental assessment. Within the environmental assessment, you need to know this, is that you have approximately 180 days, including weekends, to review projects, and there's no extension. And that was a real challenge because a lot of our communities stated that we don't have enough time, nor do we have enough resources to look into the current concerns that we have. So as a result of going through the whole process, we told the provincial government who were awarding the certificate to move ahead with the development of the LNG pipeline that we don't agree. So we had to file a judicial review against the decision to award the certificate back in December 19th, 2014. As a result of that court case or that filing, we were brought into more negotiations with the provincial government. Out of that negotiations, we came up with an agreement. It was called the collaboration agreement, which would try to address all those socio-cultural negative issues that were identified in the EA, and also the environmental stewardship issues that were identified out of the EA. As a result of that, we had huge issues with the cumulative impacts of the development project. So what was born out of that was a new initiative, which was along the whole pipeline way, was the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, the ESI, and which we're participating in. And furthermore, we have further initiatives with the Carrie-Sakani. So out of that, out of our people really asserting their rights, title, and interests, and making their concerns well known, it really demonstrated the issues with our current two levels of government and how our issues are being addressed. Right now, without proper land use planning, there's many of these developments occurring at very ad hoc in terms of how they're being dealt with, because cumulative impacts isn't being addressed, because we're working in silos with the provincial government. And that was a big issue where we were looking at all these other issues that I stated earlier on, that they're all connected, that the fragmentation of the land affects the water, that affects the fish. And as soon as you start delving into one issue, another issue will pop up. And that's why it's so important that initiatives such as this and discussions like cumulative impacts need to be discussed, need to really look into in regards to our governance as Indigenous people. So today we're looking at the how do we implement free, prior, and informed consent before any decisions are being made. And that's the real political reality that we're seeing now. And that's where the two levels of government are quite frankly struggling with. because on one level you're getting pressured from private industry to move ahead a project, and on the other side you're trying to adhere to Indigenous governance who want to make decisions, and we do want to make decisions. We're not against economic development. We see it as a way, as quite possibly, to alleviate many of the social issues that we're experiencing. And that's one of the ways that we can mitigate those social issues of overcrowding, housing issues, food security. And that's when economic development allows for our people to make decisions on their own and in their own lives, and to take care of their children. One of the biggest issues that we experience is child apprehension within the communities. Right now we see as many children in the child care system than we've seen at the height of the residential school system. So there are many social implications. It's not just the land, but it's how it affects our people within our social fabric, within the family unit. And this is the way we see it. It's not just how the land is being affected, but it's really how our whole family unit, our whole society functions. And I think that's, in many respects, that's what cumulative effects and cumulative impacts allows us as in modern day society to look at, of all those other questions that have implications not just on the land, but how does it affect us as a society in regards to the decisions and the behaviors in the future. And many of the things that not only affect us on the land, but these new realities with climate change. How do we make decisions there? How are we going to mitigate the issues of climate change? Because that's a huge question that we're all struggling with the development of, let's say, once again, LNG. How is that going to affect the cumulative effect of the air, and how is that affecting climate change? So those are the things that we know is happening right now, and those are the issues that we need to mitigate in the near future. How do we plan for climate change? How do we plan our land? How do we plan for climate change? How do we really affect our behavior for the future, for the betterment of not only our benefit, but for the benefit of those that don't have a voice, the animals, the water, the air. So I think this is a very important subject matter that really has implications geopolitically, not only within Canada, but within the world. I've been to several of these discussions about climate change. I was in Copenhagen at the climate change discussions, where really there was a promise for of a Kyoto 2, back in the early 90s, when we were going to try to deal with climate change. But as a result of that didn't happen. I think the Paris Accord is a good thing that we are signatory to, and those commitments that we made there can't happen soon enough. So, the decisions that we make here regionally, provincially, in Canada affects the whole world. So cumulative impacts is a very important discussion, and we have to think holistically. And these things that we're talking about is very close to how we think about the land. When what our elders talk about, you can't talk about one thing because it affects another thing. So I just want to leave you with those thoughts, and thank you for the invite and talks today, and very interesting and very important subject matter. Merci.
Thank you, Terry. So now we'll turn it back to the audience, because I know one person was waiting for the microphone, and that's great. Thanks.
Hi, it's Barb Oak from Northern Health, and I just wanted to ask a question around, I can't remember who said it, but about taking a values-based approach or managing for values. And one of the things that we've been struggling with a little bit at Northern Health is just how do we come up with a common set of values, or what values are the ones you manage for, and what indicators do you use for those values? And I'm just wondering if you could give any kind of lessons learned of how you worked with the community to kind of come up with a set of values and indicators moving forward, because I know it's a very challenging topic, and it's one that we've been grappling with for the last little bit.
Sit with the community, sit with the elders, go have coffee, go have tea. Ask them, what do you want? What are you looking for? What do you need? That's what you do. People are saying, oh, we need this, we need that. No, sit down and talk with them. Ask them, do a workshop. Get them start writing things on the board. Here's what we're looking for. Here's what we need. You talk about the health. Oh, we got berries out there. They're covered in dust. Oh, we'll wash them. No. Quit driving up and down the road and dusting out my berries. That's health, right? Picking those berries. What trees are there to tell us that these berries are there? Those are things that come into play. Sitting down and talking with the people is how you get information. I can't tell you what they know. They have to tell us what they know. The elders are their libraries. They're libraries of information. They know so much. It's just astounding. We will never know what they know. We got youth who are learning things. We have people who know things. We have people who are, I got hunters, I got gatherers. We have people who are specific at what they do. But sit down and talk to them. What are you most worried about? That's how you find out. And you sit down and talk and discuss it. And they tell, and when you sit with them, and they'll tell each other, and they talk. We get a group of elders together. It's amazing the things you come up with. Go out in the camp, sit out in the teepee for a while. Holy smokes, you hear wonderful stories. That's what's going on. That's how you find the values and the components and see what they're looking for, what they want.
In our area, we've been working on a Gitsan community well-being framework for a number of years. And it's coming down. Our elders were quite concerned, as you've heard today, about the well-being of our people. And they said, what can we do about this? And so we asked people, like Clayton is saying, we did a whole bunch of community engagement sessions about what's most important. Healthy land, healthy people. And we would break that down even further. And so we have like 500 indicators now. We have to decide what are the most important in these areas that we want to report on back to our people. So we can say in 1 year, with all these investments in our area, this was the outcome of that. This is what has changed. This is what has improved for our people. We have better housing. We have water, good water. We have kids graduating from high school. We have elders that are feeling good about who they are and don't have chronic health issues. And we have things happening in the land that are good and they're not impacting us in a bad way or a negative way. So we've been doing this for about 5 years now, and we're at the point of holding our, it's going to be called a Gitsan census. We're hiring youth to do this work, to go door to door, because the census, the work, the data that we get doesn't tell us the whole picture. So we're pulling up those stories, those connections to land and people, those relations that are so important. Our elder said, you know how we know we're doing a good job when the children's eyes sparkle. That's how we know we're doing a good job. That's how we know we're healthy and strong and whole again. And we want all our people to be that way and not forevermore. So those are some of the values that we're looking at, and it's been a really grueling process because data is probably the most boring thing to look at. Our youth get it. You know, they're on their phones right away, and they understand when we want to do a survey or we want to do a community engagement session like this, they're right in there sharing their voice. And as I shared yesterday, we've done a lot of work around voice, helping our people have a voice. Because through residential school and through oppression, our people have been silenced, our women, some of our elders. So we've done a lot of work around voice and taking care of spirit and creating those safe spaces so that we can talk, have these courageous conversations. Because the well-being of our people, for me, is our most urgent thing to look at. Healthy people, healthy land. And so all the work that we do, we try to move in that way. That's our most important value.
there any more questions from the audience? There's a microphone right there. I know, sorry. This is the last one.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk so far. Thank you, Chief. I work on climate change adaptation, and I've been working with some Indigenous colleagues on traditional knowledge being used for planning, and trying to figure out how Western science can benefit rather than the other way around. So how can Western science serve traditional knowledge planning? And I'm also hearing that climate change is disrupting some of the traditional knowledge, so, or at least that there are changes being seen that are not things that have been seen before. And so I just wondered if you could comment on that, and if you're seeing disruptions that are challenging traditional knowledge, and also if you think that the kind of work we do on climate change adaptation is often we're projecting conditions. So we're saying, you know, in 20 years or 40 years, we think it's going to be hotter here, or there's going to be a lot more rain or a lot less ice. Is that the kind of thing that could be useful in terms of contributions to traditional knowledge planning from a Western science input?
Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, if you look in the Arctic areas, you obviously see the climate change has detrimental effects on the Indigenous people, on the Inuit. But here, Central Ontario, British Columbia, what we're seeing is one of the effects of the mountain pine beetle. I'm a graduate of UNBC. I'm an RPF out of this great university, and you know, when I finished school in early 2000s, we were experiencing some of the worst wildfires. What we thought was some of the worst wildfires in 2003, 2005, but this past year, 2017, was probably the worst. And those really affect not only Indigenous communities, but all communities. And as we move forward, I think from a real Western science perspective, and how that affects our Indigenous people, and they're very similar, because we all know as foresters that the age class of much of our trees are getting older. And as climate changes, it's very hard for a tree if you don't have these cold snaps, and if you don't have enough rain, or water regimes are fluctuating and change. It keeps a lot of these forests more susceptible to pests such as mountain pine beetle or any beetle, and we're seeing it in the spruce forests now. It makes it quite easier for those pests to expand their territories, but at the same time, as part of Indigenous people, and we're seeing it, is that the fluctuations. I think the fluctuations in snow accumulation. Some years are a lot higher, and some are lower, and I think that's the result of, well, it is the result of climate change. So it's going to have some effect on the land, and how much water is going to be running off the land. I know up in Takla, where I'm from Takla Lake First Nations, the fluctuations in the snowpack on the very high mountains are having detrimental effects to the creeks that we have up there. And those creeks were utilized by the early and late Stuart salmon. So where does the fish go, right? It goes to a different place, or they die. So these are real implications of climate change and how it affects our people. And so I guess mitigative factors, we have to think about, what do we do about that? Or can we do anything? Some of this might be just simply out of our control, so what do we do? And those are the real implications we're seeing. So I'm not sure what the solution is, but at the same time, we have to do something. Perhaps one of the things that we do need to do in terms of declining salmon stocks is to what works. Do we need hatcheries? Do we need to really bring out hatcheries once again to save those populations? So, you know, those are the real effects that we're experiencing.
Climate change is something we've dealt with for years. Up in the Moberly, they start cutting down all the trees. The Elder Snowson River goes down every year. It's getting lower and lower and lower. The water level is going down. That affects our ability to fish, to trap around there. Where we used to put the traps here, they're going, they're disappearing. The animals that go to the rivers, to go to the lakes, having farther, harder, and harder places to migrate. Putting in the Bennett Dam made a huge impact. They all can't migrate. And we've been telling government and everybody for years, this is happening, that's happening. Use your science to come back us up. We've been telling that for years. The marmots are disappearing, the fishes are disappearing. Oh, hey, we noticed this. Yeah, we've been telling you that for years. Use your science, come back up what the elders have been telling you. We sit back and work and we can get this stuff figured out. It's not that hard. You know, stop, talk, figure it out. Thank you.
I just wanted to say something about the Indigenous knowledge. In BC, we have like 30 different Indigenous peoples, many First Nations. So whenever we do any work with First Nations or Indigenous people, we're respectful of all that diversity. And across Canada, it's even more diverse. So that's part of our nation-to-nation respectful teachings that we want people to learn and understand. There's important teachings around being Indigenous, but wherever you go, you're in somebody's homeland, and their ancestors are there, and their spirits are there. So we have to be respectful of where we are and the people that are there. And so that's probably the most important thing for me to say, that is that whenever we go anywhere, we always honor the ancestors of that homeland and the language and the teachings that are there. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Thank you. That resumes, or concludes, not resumes, our presentation this morning. So many thanks to our panelists, Sandra, Terry, Clayton, Agnes. Really appreciate that you were here this morning and gave your time. And thank you to all of you for being here and participating in this important forum. So I wish you a very lovely rest of your day, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. Thank you.